Well, welcome back to the Dungeon Master's Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of all other people at the table. I am your host, DM Mitch, and today we're joined by none other than Tim Bailey, writer on the Flavor City design team for Monsters of Merca, Restaurants, and Retail. Really excited because within this episode, we're going to be talking about fantasy world foods, and it's going to be a great conversation about how you can focus on them in your games, bring them to life with your players, their PCs, and just showcase more of the world, add some more reality to it. But before we jump into the meat, we have a 5-star review from Apple Podcasts, and this one comes from Dr. Cat and is entitled, An Invaluable Resource in Anyone's DM Journey. I actually started listening to this podcast 2 years ago, back when I only tentatively dreamed of being a DM. As a woman, it is a kind of intimidating crowd to get into. Chris and Mitch gave me the tools and courage to start my own game, and Neil pushed me to step outside of my comfort zone and get creative with DMnastics. I have now run 3 different campaigns and recently started creating my own world. I have also found the community to be a lot more supportive of female DMs than I originally thought, which I am very happy about. Thanks to the DMB family and to anyone out there looking for knowledge and inspiration, this is the podcast for you. That is a fantastic review. Thank you so much, Dr. Cat. It's so awesome to hear about your journey into DMing, and 3 campaigns in and creating your own world. That's fantastic. I'd love to hear, I'm sure we would all love to hear more about your world and your experience. So of course, feel free to send us an email sometime. One more thing before we dive into the meat. If you are a Patreon dragon, DM Chris has put together some fantastic menus for you to download over on the Patreon feed and use in your D&D games. So head on over, check them out. They're available for you there. Well, without any further ado, let's get into this episode. Let's get into the meat.
I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?
The flat meat's back on the menu, boys!
So for on this segment of the meat, I want to introduce all of you to Tim Bailey, writer on the Flavor City design team for Monsters of Merca, Restaurants, and Retail. Tim, welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here.
It's awesome to have you. I was looking through this a little bit beforehand on the Kickstarter, and I know that there's very little time left, so I got to jump in and support it. But before we get into what this whole supplement is, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
All right. I've been playing D&D since the Advanced D&D 2nd Edition era, so roughly when I was 11. So 20 years of that. Finally decided to get my feet wet and jump into writing, and submitted a sample with Action Fiction, and got onto this project, and now here I am with that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, this is actually my first time doing any writing, and it is wild to see it doing so well.
Yeah. What did you? Sorry, I know we talked about this off air, just improvising a little bit, but I'm curious, like, what was the motivation for you to jump into writing after just playing? Was it you had just done so much writing as a DM that was just fun, and you thought it would be fun to do?
I've done quite a bit of writing as a DM, and a little bit just writing stories in my academic career, and I saw, just because I was bumming around Twitter because I couldn't really go anywhere. I'm a very social kind of person, so I like to get out of the house, which is just not happening in the middle of a pandemic. So
Nope.
Instead, I just started going to Twitter for my social interaction needs, which is not the best choice, but it's a choice that was available to me. And as a result of that, I ended up spotting, or just kind of following, a lot of the independent role-playing game design community. Found out about the launch of the Monsters of Merca core book, and I signed up to play in one of the live streamed playtest games or demo games to promote the release. And from there they said, hey, we liked what you did on the stream. We liked the creativity. Would you like to submit a sample and maybe write for us?
And the rest is history.
And then it all
rest
came
is-
together. Yeah.
Well, the rest is history in progress.
In progress, yeah.
Now, I don't know what you're talking about with Twitter, because the internet is a wonderful place where everybody gets along
All the time.
Yeah,
All the time.
sure.
But speaking about getting you starting writing and being a writer on this project, can you tell us a little bit about this project, Monsters of America, Restaurants and Retail?
Yeah, absolutely. So the core book, which you can pick up on DriveThruRPG right now, it's a lot of fun. It's this fantasy satirical version of the U.S., just with as many references and memes as the writers could pack into it, just crammed in with a plunger. And as a result of how well that did and just how many more ideas the original design team had, they decided they wanted to expand it a bit and just take on different ideas of capitalism and food. So we joked a little bit about the Escape from Flavortown meme that's been going around forever. And we decided to make that into a reality. And we also got Wall Moria and the Hall of Merca as our parody of the Mall of America. And so it's 3 different ones. And each of these settings was created by a completely separate, or each location, I should say, is put together by a separate team of writers. And we all just kind of went nuts with it. So Wall Moria has turned into this impressive Tolkien-esque set of mines in a big box retail chain. The Hall of Merca is this massive castle city devoted to just little bitty tiny shops. And of course, Flavor City, it ended up being kind of an homage both to Flavortown and a certain city that we can't name per the SRD agreement, but its name is very symbolic, as it were.
It rhymes with something that we all know. that class.
It rhymes with vigil.
Oh, there we go. Yeah. That's awesome. I love the fact that, like, in some ways it feels like pun meets restaurant meets D&D in some ways. Like,
that is,
and
well, you've just described my entire writing style for this.
Yeah, which is funny because, like, that feels like the stuff that our D&D community and frankly, like, the world kind of eats up. These puns and memes, like, are our kind of like release for all of the junk that we find in our world, and you guys are cramming it into something that people already use to escape the terrible things that happen in the world around us in a writing supplement featuring other things that people use to escape food and retail. Like, it's brilliant.
We've just combined all of it together, and it's great. By the time folks are hearing this, unfortunately, it will be a little too late to back us, but the backer kit will be opened up once all the numbers are crunched and collated and put together. So anyone who does want to try and pre-order this, especially if they want to get their hands on the deluxe hardcover edition with the foil cover, which I've seen the artist samples, they're fantastic. Beautiful, so that'll still be an option. I'm actually probably going to talk to Jaron and see if I can snag one of those for myself.
Well, yeah, I feel like you put in the time to earn it, I guess. Yeah.
Are you going to sign your own edition?
Yeah, there you go.
Only if I get the other 15 writers.
There you go. Yeah.
Or sorry,
then it's
other
gotta
17.
be complete. Yeah.
There you go.
Exactly.
All right. So, Tim, we have one of the things that we do with our guests is we have a surprise question that you had no idea what it is or way to prepare for. Just to keep you on your feet a little bit.
I'm ready for you.
This one comes from our patron dragon, Jared Arteche. So here's the question. You somehow avoid dying as an adventurer, which, let's be honest, is super difficult to do, and are ready to retire. How do you, Tim, adventurer, spend your twilight years?
Ooh, that is an interesting one. So me as myself, the ongoing joke with the writing team, because I play a bunch of different instruments, is that I am just the iconic bard on the team.
Yes.
So I suppose retiring from adventuring, I'd probably open up a little tavern, let other adventurers come through and share stories with them. Maybe run an open mic for the up and coming bards who want to hone their skills, that sort of thing. But a nice little tavern and inn,
Nice.
kind of thing.
That feels right up the alley of what you're already writing about.
Exactly.
Does the adventure for a bard ever truly end? It's just, you're on the road and now you're just doing concerts in your own little
Exactly.
town, right?
Yeah. It's not a true end to the adventure. It's just an end to the touring.
Yes, exactly. Fantastic. Well, let's jump into the topic today, which I was really excited to be able to talk with your team and work out this episode, because this episode's something that we've wanted to do for a while, and we were just kind of looking for the right person to jump in. And with this fantastic book that's coming out focused on restaurants and retail, we thought it'd be a great time to talk about food in a fantasy world. And so bringing that to the forefront of our discussion and talking about, we're running as DMs games in fantasy worlds. How often does food play a part? Obviously, characters are always going to taverns and ordering something. And if you're like me, most of the time you're not prepared with a list of awesome different dishes. And so I think sometimes the food at the tavern might just be kind of an afterthought. Oh, yeah, you order some food, or you just pull out the same kind of thing. Oh, turkey dinner, cool. But I think that there's a whole lot of inspiration that we could dive into today for bringing food into fantasy games. So I guess the first thing we want to talk about is ways of implementing food into your fantasy games beyond just the fact that you're going to be ending up at taverns in most D&D games, right? So what are your guys' thoughts on how to make food be implemented into games in a way that makes sense, in a way that brings fantasy foods as the center of attention?
So that's a great question, and it's funny because we actually have a couple of ready answers for that in the restaurants and retail book.
Awesome.
And one of the nice things that we went out of our way to do is the restaurants and retail book and the core Merca book are balanced against the 5e SRD. So while our subclasses and our items are a little bit weird and possibly a little bit niche, they're not going to be more powerful or less powerful than what you're used to using anyway. So if you wanted to just borrow a couple of items or a couple of restaurants and just plug those in, reflavor them a little bit, flavor. So it would be an option. And the Flavor City section, all of us wrote at least 2 restaurants of the team of 6 that worked on that one. And each restaurant has a menu of different food items. Some of these food items have magical effects. 2 of mine, for instance, I wrote the Barfalo Wicked Wings restaurant, which has a bunch of different standard pub fare type food. But there's one dish, the 4 Fiendish Horsemen, or 4 Fiendish Horses, which is 4 extremely spicy peppers on the wing sauce. And if you eat that, it gives you a temporary breath weapon attack.
Nice. And its slogan is what? Beer or ale, wings, fantasy carnival games or something?
We actually do have sports in Merca as well. Slam ball is a big one that's mentioned in the core book. So
nice. I love it.
It's funny that you bring up restaurants, because I feel like I know when I DM, I never think of what restaurants are in this city or this town that the PCs are going to, because it kind of just becomes this thing that, at least in my games, well, they're gonna eat dinner at the tavern that they're staying in. But I love, even as a DM, I know my players are always looking for the cheapest tavern, the cheapest inn to stay in, and I love describing the food as oh, you pick this cheap tavern, this cheap inn to stay in, and describing the food as disgusting and gross and flies are everywhere, and your PCs look outside the window and across the way you see lights and music, and there's this beautiful restaurant next door where it seems like everybody's just jolly and having a good time, and the smell of food is just wafting your way. Perhaps your adventurers, after that long journey, want to go and and try some more interesting dishes
Oh yeah.
than the porridge that you're eating right now that doesn't smell too good.
Yeah. So at that point, they might have a moment of, oh, you know what? I don't mind staying at this Inn 4 with all of the flea-bitten
Yep.
piles
Yeah.
of hay.
Maybe I'll
here.
go to the
It's-
I'll go to the plush horse instead of the seedy rat, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Or and with our book, we've got you go across the street, even if you don't want to spend a lot of money. There's the taquito chime just across the way, and you can pick up something real cheap but filling.
Yeah.
There's a couple things when I think about food that I love to incorporate into the game as I think about like myself enjoying restaurants and food. Like one, the reason I go to a restaurant is because I am thinking about getting out, blowing off steam, having fun, right? Like going with a group of friends and having fun. So like the atmosphere that I try to create in whether it's an inn or a tavern or a restaurant it's something fun. Like people are laughing, people are joking, people are having a good time, like setting the mood in that way, especially if you're in like a major town, kind of going to a regular nice restaurant. Like I think about that. Like I go because I think about the regular like tastes and flavors that I have. Like there are specific restaurants that I go to for a specific thing, right? Like I know that there is a Thai restaurant where I grew up that I will go to and get the same thing every single time because it's the best thing on the menu. I've had a lot of their stuff, but I will go there to get that thing, right? So like thinking through a menu of like what are things that like my players might be able to project on to that space, right? Like could they create pies, right? Like pizza pies where they go in and they absolutely love like those sorts of pizza. What's the thing that's going to like enhance my players' involvement in that moment because they're thinking about, their mouth is watering because they're thinking about, the wings that are there or the cheddar broccoli soup that's there or whatever it is. Like that sort of immersion can happen so quickly when you're in a tavern. Like you walk in and you immediately smell steak being cooked in the back, right? Like there are some players that are just going to salivate at that. There are other players that are like, can I see like a different menu? Like Mitch, we joke about this when we go to IHOP. Like I love going there for pancakes, right? Every time we go there, you get a burger.
I'm not a breakfast
right?
person. I'm not a breakfast person. So in college, it was always like it was late at night, hanging out with the college crowd, and it was like, oh, I got a great idea. Let's go get breakfast for a late night snack. And I'm like, I don't even want breakfast for breakfast. What are we doing, guys?
But like, so you're going to go in there and like, those are some things that you might be able to personify in that place. When you give somebody a menu, it might be like, hey, tonight is breakfast special. Well, there are going to be people that don't like breakfast special, right? Like you don't even have to have a menu that's like labeled for that specific place. You just hand them like, make 10 or 20 different random generated ones. Like you can find them online and just pull them out randomly. Say, hey, here's the one for the night that they have, right? Like,
well,
good.
Well, and that might be like a player thing, but that would be a player character thing as well. The player characters are going to have foods that they like and that they don't like, and that's kind of a cool little like small little thing that can be brought like to attention that most players I feel like don't think about. With the exception of one thing that I think opens the door for exploration of this sense is like the game I'm currently running for my home group. I have two PCs that one of them is a humanoid rhino and one of them is a humanoid panda, and they are both vegetarians. And so they go into the local tavern and get the meat porridge smacked down on their plate because that's what the dinner is for the night. They're going to go, I can't eat this. Well, that's all that they're serving here. So you might have to go out and find something different. And there are going to be restaurants that are going to cater to more types of food. And you kind of get to have a little bit of exploration time with that.
Yeah, I definitely love that, especially if you're working with a larger city, just having the ability to force people to kind of go across town and explore, delve more into the city. It opens it up because a lot of times I find big city, little city, players end up treating it the same if you don't give them a reason to treat them differently. Years ago, I ran a campaign. It's funny you mentioned just the idea of people's attachment to different foods. There was the party I had this funny moment because the bard had taken cook's utensils proficiency And somehow or other, he just kept on rolling high every time he went about making dishes with it. And what ended up happening one session was our ranger decided to go foraging and searching for eggs, and the druid went looking for mushrooms. And the end result was they just started making mushroom omelets that were absolutely fantastic for everyone but the paladin, who had very nearly been taken out by a fungal monster in a previous session. So he wanted nothing to do with this omelet. So he's just sitting there eating salted pork while everyone else is eating this just amazing omelet.
Religiously angry at anything that, like a paladin should be, anything fungal. Yeah. It is now 100% evil, and I will throw my holy symbol at it every time. One of the things, Mitch, you might have been a part of the campaign that I ran, but like one of the fun things that I did was like I thought about like the breweries in the city that I was around for a long time before I moved, and this is a regular occurrence too, of like what are the, like a lot of places run happy hour specials, right? A lot of places have like mug clubs and stuff like that. So like what are the things that like are going to bring your players back? And I can't remember if you were a part of this or not, Mitch, but like I had a coaster club that these people had. Like this guy was trying to open up a brewery, right? And like he was in this town, and these were the first people that walked in, and he said, hey, for these 4 people that walked in, like we're giving away 20 coasters that have like, I think it was like the Fat Wizard or something like that, where it was like this fat wizard on there that was just drunk out of his mind, but it was like burned into the coaster club. And everywhere that they went, like every time they came back to this town, they were like, sweet, I want to go here because my first drink is free for the night, Like, of course I want to go back to that place because we get free ale, Like those sorts of
I love
those
that.
sorts of things are fun,
and I love it because of the name.
Yeah, well, but then the guy like followed them after a while, like because they had created like this other settlement like in between 2 major cities, and he opened up a brewery there, and that coaster was like recognized there. So it was like this thing that started to like turn into like this chain restaurant. So like that's another thing you could do. Like, are there chain restaurants for fun in a place, right? Like if you go from like Los Angeles to like Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I'm from, like you'll know that there's an Applebee's there somewhere, right? And some people absolutely love Applebee's, So like, is that a thing like in a town or in a nation where it's like you go from one major city to the other and there's a Fat Wizard on the corner, that like you get to go to, and you're like, hey, I wonder if it's the same sort of feel as the other one because there's an ale there that I really like, and my coaster club will be recognized here, sort of thing. So like those could be fun things too that could really be inspirational for your players to have fun with in your game.
And that's such a good like hook that you can get your players, that like if you can see that your players are like, oh yeah, every time we go into a new city or a new town, they're like, where's the next Fat Wizard? We're going to the Fat Wizard. Like you've got them to be invested in a specific restaurant. I think that's a great and easy kind of segue into another thing that I think would be a good way to promote food, or even like you said, Chris, drinks, like is make up some like small menus for like restaurants and like hand them out to your players when they sit down at that restaurant. And if you've got them already that they're going to the Fat Wizard, like you go ahead and print Fat Wizard with the like little symbol at the top of it, so it just like makes it even more real and even more of a cool experience when you hand them that, and they're looking at the the menu, and they're like, oh, I'll have the Fat Wizard burger. That sounds delicious. Like give me that. Like making menus for different restaurants and taverns. Like I think that like is such a cool idea. And of course, you wanna go with the like take the tea bags and make them look kind of like dated because you're in a fantasy world. And but that to me just would be a cool thing if I was sitting there as a player having no expectation of that, to be handed a menu. You've got me. I'm in it. I want to see what my character is going to order. I'm all about it. I want like to look and see like the ingredients described. I can't wait to hear the DM describe what the dish looks like. I'm so invested at that moment.
I love the mention of that because you're playing so much into the work we did on this Kickstarter campaign.
Yeah.
One of the first stretch goals we offered was everyone who has backed us is getting PDF copies of just menus for every restaurant in the setting,
sweet.
To give as handouts for the players, because we know players love handouts.
Yes.
Some of them think they don't, They just haven't had good handouts.
Yeah, I can't imagine a player getting handed a menu for a restaurant and being like,
Meh, whatever.
Like every player, I feel like is going to at the very least appreciate. Oh, this is pretty cool.
Yeah,
this is cool.
This is the DM putting in that extra step.
Yes.
Well, because I think, and this might be a segue to the next thing, like on a menu in a fantasy world, like you can literally put anything you want on there, right? Like it doesn't, like we think about, America for the most part. It's like you can go to a restaurant and you can get like noodles and steak or a burger or some sort of chicken or, whatever it is. But like a fantasy world is not limited to the normal staples that we think of. Like you might find, cockatrice or dragon or basilisk meat or whatever it might be that could be a really interesting spot for your players to be in. Like you get to reinvent in some ways what staples are in the world. Like it might beef or lamb or chicken might not be the normal thing that people eat in that world.
That might be rare.
It might be rare. Domesticated animals
might not be rare.
Might not be readily available for it to be a regular occurrence. So like I think that's interesting. Like thinking about what sorts of foods could you add that could be weird. And like is the expense based off of the challenge rating of a creature? So like.
Ooh.
Is it like
how much would a poached dragon egg cost, right?
Yeah.
Like, and here's the thing. I don't know if I'm the only one, but as a DM, when my players see something that isn't going to benefit them at all, like eating an egg, but they're willing to shill over tons of gold for it, it's kind of this exciting, like you've got them in a role-playing opportunity, and just seeing the excitement, it's like, they're going to eat this egg. They're going to talk about it. They're going to walk away from the table being like, my character ate a poached dragon egg tonight. But they're not walking away with a sword that does plus 10 fire damage. That like every player, of course, is like, oh yeah, that's a cool mechanical thing. But I don't know, when you have that player's eyes light up and they're like 1,000 gold for a poached dragon egg, fork that money over.
Yeah.
We're in.
Oh yeah, well you get them invested, you get them started to think in the world. They're thinking, you know what?
Mm-hmm.
Do I want to be that guy who can says, yeah, I had a poached dragon egg. I absolutely want to be that guy who says, yes, I had the poached dragon egg.
Especially the guy who wants to retire someday as a bard and tell all of these crazy stories, right, Tim? Like you want to be able to say that 100%. In your tavern someday.
Well, then he's writing down in his journal, when I open up that tavern, it's got to have poached dragon.
Well, and then
it's going to be on there. I might even pay some adventurers to go out. Hey, there's a dragon up there. Bring me eggs.
Seriously, I mean, it might be. I mean, this whole idea of food does open up the opportunity for tons of adventure hooks. Like, especially if you're doing a more sandboxy sort of thing. Like, you could walk in and see the menu and be like, "Whoa, that whatever challenge rating 3 monster meat is like ridiculously priced. Why is that? Well, because it's in such limited supply." Or you might see like out of stock, on the tavern sheet, and it might give the players an opportunity to say like, hey, I noticed you were out of stock of this. Like, do you have anybody going out to get this? Do you want us to go and find this, right? Like, then it leads them to this cavern somewhere where they have to go and wander into to get more like chimera meat or whatever, it is that they need for the menu that like they now are getting paid for by this cook who they now become friends with. And like there's so many opportunities when you spread out, or not spread out, but like when you open up the possibilities of what food can do in the world, it can open up a lot of different opportunities for role playing for your players.
Absolutely.
Well, it's also being a huge dive into region that you're playing in and cultures that are around you. Because like, I think Chris, you brought up like cockatrice, right? At a certain point, like if you're in a region that cockatrice are like all over, then it might be very cheap on the menu because it's normal, and like people are like, oh yeah, like I'll have the roast.
Might want to think about moving, honestly, but
right, yeah. But speaking of, then maybe you go somewhere else where there aren't cockatrice, they have to be shipped in, and it might be more expensive. But also to get into like the intricacies of cooking, you might like buy a cockatrice, like roasted cockatrice, from a place that's not their native food, and you go and you bite into it and you bite down on a pebble. Because one of the things that they have to do is like if you're used to cooking cockatrice, you know you have to make sure you remove all the stones from the stomach. You have to make sure there's nothing like that in there. And if this is not a food that somebody is used to cooking, well, it might not be cooked right. And then you got to ask yourselves, all right, I'm in the greatest dwarven city in the world. What culturally are the dwarves cooking? Is that going to be very different than the hobbits in the Shire? Is that going to be very different than high elves and forest elves and just different regions of the world and the different cultures? Food should absolutely, when your players walk into that tavern or that restaurant or wherever they're going to get food, the street markets, it should totally have a reflection of the culture around them and the region around them.
Mm-hmm. And that's I love the reference to dwarves when it comes to food, because I've seen people tweet about it, and even some Tumblr posts get screenshotted about that, because the idea of dwarven food is such a funny idea, because you always see descriptions in fantasy novels describing dwarven food as very bland. And I kind of wondered about that, and someone outlined it really beautifully when they described, well, dwarves have this greater resistance to poison. They've got very high constitution. They're very hardy people. So what if what you're getting that's tasting so bland isn't actually what they serve themselves normally? What if they know that they eat things that will probably kill you most of the time, and that's their authentic cuisine? The stuff that they serve you is just the stuff that they're pretty sure is safe. Oh yeah, tonight we're having basilisk and purple potato stew. Oh, that kills humans.
Yeah, right.
I guess I better also make a rice porridge. But humans can eat rice, right?
I think so.
All right. Here's the greatest way you implement that. You hand out those menus, and the dwarven PC gets one menu, and everybody else gets a different
secret menu.
And you just wait for the players to notice that. Like, the dwarven character's like, I'll have this. And everybody's
not on
like,
my menu.
Where was that on the menu we were ordering?
Yeah, I think that's hilarious, like, to think about, because I mean, you can do that with, like, it's almost like working up a tolerance for spice, right? Like, spicy foods, you have to work your way up to. Like, you're not going to walk into a restaurant somewhere in our world where it's super spicy and order the super hot thing, right? If you've never had spicy food before, because it will literally melt you from inside
Destroy
out.
you,
Like,
yeah.
it will hurt so many times over. Maybe it's the same sort of thing where the dwarves are like, there's a different level of toxicity to it, right? So it's like, you can get basilisk meat, but it might be like, the older the basilisk gets, the more toxic it is, and that's or vice versa, the older it is, the less toxic it is, so you gradually work your way up and say, like, I want the mild basilisk tonight, and you might like,
I want a 3 out of 5.
3 out of 5. Just want to warn you, a 3 for me is not a 3 for you. The classic, like, restaurant, like, just so you know, you look like somebody who can't handle spice, so do it a little bit less.
Well, and take this further than, like, the normal, like, PC races. If you were going to have players who had a dinner invite from a fire giant, what is their dinner gonna look like? Like, do we drink this lava? Like, is that what we're? I don't know what to do here.
Is this the soup, or is this to wash my hands in?
Yeah.
Because either way,
Either's gonna kill me.
Yeah.
But lava is the most purifying way of washing your hands. Come on, guys.
Yeah, no germs survive that. So.
Here's the kitty lava drink. It's fake.
It's so great to think of fire giants being all about soup being super clean before eating their dinners.
I feel like that's the last thing they're probably worried about.
I mean, they don't really need to.
No, yeah, literally everything around them is sanitary all the time because it's on fire.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, yeah, autoclave the world.
Yeah.
But even with PC races, though, you run into that a little bit if you start getting a little bit weird with it, because Aarakocra and Kenku, they're both birds. In the real world, from a biological standpoint, birds are immune to capsaicin. So spice, they don't notice it whatsoever. They're completely immune to it. So they could sit there eating the world's spiciest dwarven chili that involves peppers from other dimensions, peppers straight from Avernus.
And it'd be like Legolas drinking the alcohol in Lord of the Rings.
Totally.
Oh, this is quite nice.
Yeah. Huh. You look like you're having trouble
And if
with
it's a Kenku, they may sound exactly like Legolas.
Yeah, who knows? Yeah, I think that's a fun thing to think about too. Is just the ways that foods. Yep. I'm gonna have to write a whole bunch of stuff down after this, like how this works in my world.
All right. Speaking of races, though, if you're playing in a game of all Warforged, this is not the episode for you.
Not at all. Different oil thickness. I don't know. Whatever. Warforged eat and drink.
I mean, there's all kinds of ways to play that as well. If you start getting ridiculous with it, we did a 24-hour live stream for restaurants and retail, and Jaren, the guy who came up with the original idea of Monsters of Merca, decided to play one of our subclasses that we created, the Sorcerer's Origin.
Nice.
And he decided to play a Warforged Sorcerer. And the only thing that came to mind is the sauce is in his veins. It's not like he needs blood anyway, right? So it's...
Well, then you get into like, is he the Beethoven of mages or of like chefs? Because like, do Warforged taste anything, or how does he know that this actually works? You know, like Beethoven couldn't hear and he just created beautiful music. Does he just know?
Or maybe it's complex calculations. Maybe he knows the precise level of every ingredient that goes into the sauce, and it's always perfect. It's just micro measuring.
Yeah, he's like weighing stuff in his hand because he knows how much it weighs. Yeah.
Well, he's very carefully calibrated for that.
Totally. Oh, that sounds awesome.
I just took it to the dark place of that party better not get like locked in a dungeon somewhere because they know which party member they're eating first.
Oh gosh.
Well, sure as
hell because the Warforged or the Warforged knows which person to eat first because they can get the most proportions out of them. Dangerous.
And just tap the vein for a little bit of
sauce. Dangerous. Oh man.
So many weird ways.
Oh yeah, totally. These. Let's just not have Warforged mages who create food. They're dangerous.
We talked a lot about like all these different foods gonna like be a reflection of the region, of the cultures around you. I think it's also interesting because we've talked a little bit about this with like the poached dragon egg and things like that. But like in a fantasy world, like what are the ingredients that are going into these dishes? And in a world filled with magic, and this is something that I know Chris was like, we have to talk about this, is like, what about like ingredients that are taken from sources of magic, whether it's like a plant that's some sort of magical plant, or like what happens when you take like pixie dust and mix it into a dish, or if you take like the eyes of a gorgon and like make some sort of food with that. And ultimately, I guess what I'm asking is like, does that then give the person eating it some sort of temporary magic ability themselves, or kind of boost to it? And Chris and me were talking about like, this is the idea of like food with benefits, right? Like, and we see this a lot in especially in video games, that it's like you see all these video games where you eat a certain dish and you get a temporary boost to defense or luck or whatever it is that the game is based off of. Is that something that you could bring into a D&D campaign, a fantasy world, and how would you go about doing that?
I would say you should absolutely. It might take a little bit of time, or you might need to go looking to see if anyone else has already homebrewed something. But I would say there's no reason not to incorporate that. In a world where magic is present, it'd be silly to not figure that you could work magic into a food. If you can make it into a potion that you can drink, why can't you bake it into bread?
Yeah.
Or roast it into an abyssal chicken? Again, to go back to Avernus for a second. And all these other options. So there's all kinds of things you could do with that. Now, as far as how much of a benefit there might be, I would say maybe you've got to think about how are you preparing it. Are you taking whole gorgon's eyes, or are you dicing them up finely, mincing them? Are you boiling it? Are you frying it? Are you roasting it? Are you pan searing it? Are you butterflying it and then pan searing one side and then baking the rest? And I've just gone complete chef mode there.
Cutting it julienne, or how are we cutting it?
yeah, nice, long, thin strips, or are we going nice little cubes?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I think there's a bunch of stuff out there, and this was something that I've used in the past, and there's always the like cost versus reward, right? Like you don't want to have something that's like, yeah, I pull out a piece of meat from a cow or whatever, and I cook it, and then I automatically get like a cure wounds potion worth of like that seems ridiculous.
Why
right?
would I ever spend money on a cure wounds potion if I could
right? So like the thing that I've done in the past is thought about like how can I make something, and a really simple way that I've done in the past is think about like, okay, what does every recipe have, right? Well, most of times it calls for water or oil of some kind, right, in a recipe somewhere. So where do we get magical water? Well, the elemental plane of water, or water elementals, right? So you use like water elemental water as like the catalyst that gives it its magical properties, right? You can get various different concentrations of it for sale, so that like if you want like something that'll do an effect of like fire breathing, you get a creature that breathes fire, and if you want a higher concentration of it, the concentration of water elemental like water will cost you a fortune, but you can do it, right? Like, so there's all those sorts of things that you can think about. Like, do I add a catalyst that costs money to the food, right? Is that the sort of thing? Like, and it might be a little bit hard, but it's a different type of fun thing to add instead of just like, I always get a potion, right? Because let's be real, sometimes we forget to buy potions when we go into towns, but like I might be somebody who's interested in cooking and just have this elemental water that I don't normally do anything with, but in this moment we forgot about this. I can cook us a meal to take care of this, right? So there's that way to do it. There's also one that I was reading the other day that was like, it depends on like the rarity of the creatures, like the challenge rating that you have, right? And that this person had like a whole bunch of dishes that they had created based off of this, and there's a whole calculation to it. But like, depending on the challenge rating of the creature or the material that you're finding, it gives you a higher benefit. And there's like challenge ratings that go with actually cooking the food, because again, you don't just want to make it like you sit down and cook, right? And you make it. Because let's be real, I've made things before where I sat down and it was garbage, and I thought it was going to be great, right? That happens, especially in a world where it's like you're cooking over a campfire. There's so much stuff that could go wrong with it. Like add in a DC check for it. That makes it a little bit more difficult to get that magical ability that then benefits your players in some way, shape, or form. But I think like in Skyrim, this was a thing. I'm playing through Skyrim again, so I might reference it. Like there's the alchemy thing in there. There's cooking things that will help. Like there's so much fun stuff that like I now go through that game and I collect as many ingredients as I can find walking around. I'm like, purple mountain flower? Great, you're useful for me somehow, like random mushroom I find on a dead plant in a cave. Great, that's going to help me somehow. I don't know how, but it will at some point in time. Like the benefits that come from food in a fantasy world, I think are just endless. And you can sit down and make stuff up. But there are, like you said, Tim, there are supplements out there that you can go and find if somebody is really interested in that sort of adding food with benefits, because it would take a long time to come up with all of those dishes. And if you don't have all the time in the world to do it, but want to have that be fun, there are tons of ways you can do it.
Absolutely. I'm sure there's at least 3 or 4 on DM's Guild alone. So many more on Drive Through RPG. GM's binder is probably going to have a couple dozen of just things that folks have homebrewed. Reddit is going to be a treasure trove of that.
Yep. All of those places I looked, and they're all there. All there.
Yeah, and even one other thing that kind of ties on to that, even if you're just working with mundane ingredients and just having someone attempt to make anywhere from a good to a bad dish, just working over a campfire, even if they don't have anything special, Xanathar's Guide to Everything, page 80, the description of cook's utensils, actually has a little bit of a DC description there. So what you can do there is use that as a template, and then if you are looking at ingredients that, oh, well, this is kind of rare and kind of delicate, it's going to be a bit more difficult, so this is going to add 3 to that difficulty check, or this is going to add 5 to that difficulty check, because good luck. And if you screw it up, you're poisoning someone.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, like that is the truth. Like if you fail it bad enough, like I went to a convention in San Diego and 3/4 of the 1,000 people that were there got food poisoning because somebody like messed up somewhere in the kitchen, and like that could realistically happen to your entire party where they now like
take that and throw pixie dust into
yeah,
that.
like I mean,
and it could be way
yeah,
worse.
I mean, so like realistically,
Absolutely,
you think about like your dinner meal and you cook it and it fails. Well, you're going to be up all night, like up chucking or whatever. Like you now have a point of exhaustion the next day because you didn't sleep at all, right? Like, and then your players are like, dude, don't ever cook something for us again. Like you are the worst cook in the world. And then it becomes a running joke, like for the group, right?
That said, that's something that I love is like that we haven't talked about a lot is like, what if you have, I've had players who have said their characters like to cook. Awesome. Like if that player wants to, you should work with that player to figure out what his or her like ingredients are that they like have on a regular basis. And when they come across some sort of monster that they kill, like you could give them some sort of check to figure out like if there's parts of this creature that go really well into certain dishes. And yeah, that difficulty for cooking could be thrown in there when you're talking about magical ingredients. And it could go very, very well and it could go very poorly. But that adds something that's such a cool element to it. And then you have a player that if that's what they're doing, they're going to be your gateway into exploring food around the world and the cultures as you walk into cities. And they're not going to be wanting to just chill at the tavern that has one dish. They're going to want to go out and check out the cool restaurants.
Well,
and
why
cool
would you bother
street
staying
food
in the place that only has the one dish?
Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned just the one player wanting to be the cook. We actually built 4 subclasses into this book that are different variations of that idea.
That's awesome.
Fantastic.
Like we've got the Gormomancers, who these are wizards who have an entire new school of magic we created just for this book, and it's all food related. From a level 1 spell, just to, I can't even remember what we wrote for level 1. I know one of them was just to make a copy of an object that's entirely cake, all the way up to level 9 where we've got the meteor storm.
Of cake.
Yes.
All cake raining from the
This
sky.
is great.
Meteor storm.
This is great. We've since the very beginning of our show, we've had this running joke of a food mage that could create like a spaghetti golem and all these different things. This is the book if you've liked the talk about the food mage to go and check.
I mean, that
out.
was like
we literally have that. Yeah, the Gormomancer actually has a spell called Animate Food.
That's fantastic.
So exactly what you've described, we have it in the book. We've got the sorcerers I mentioned, but the 2 weird ones as far as a character cook are characters who are not actually heavy magic users that are still chefs. Both of our paladin subclasses are cooks, just of completely different ideas, because we needed to try and come up with something that was an ethos or a reason for someone to connect to food and even build a city around the idea of food. So we created this morality system of flavor versus deliciousness. And it's the idea of flavor is not just what you put in your mouth, it's what you put in your soul. This is the food that brings people together. Deliciousness is, this is what I want for me. It's just for me to enjoy. Y'all can eat just gruel for all I care. This is mine.
I love the idea of a food paladin being like Gordon Ramsay, who just tells everybody that they're garbage unless it's the food that's made the right specific way.
Yeah.
So good.
Yeah. Oh, both of them have a channeled divinity that actually involves cooking. So that was a lot of fun to throw in there. And the Deliciousness Paladin, I went a little dark with that one. That's our evil paladin.
With the name Deliciousness. That's awesome.
Yes. The one of the channel divinities there gives advantage to fighting or taking out a targeted monster. But as soon as you're done killing it, immediately whispers in your mind just start telling you how best to cook that thing that you just killed. So it just took out a minotaur. There's a little voice in your mind saying, slow smoke that bad boy.
Which all of this opens up some horrible discussion about what is okay and what is not okay to eat. But before we move into our homework section, I had one other thought. I thought about like this whole idea of food with benefits and magical food and like our world has like these very like niche like restaurants. Like maybe the two of you will know what I'm talking about. I don't know the actual name of the place, but I've heard of this place in Chicago that the whole point is like you go in and the whole shtick is that the servers all insult you
Ed DeBevick
through the entire dinner.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a fantasy world, how do you have these theme like restaurants, and like you got a wizard who's a sorcerer that's running a restaurant, and every single dish has this funny little like gimmick about it that you get some sort of magical effect. And I think that would be a fantastic thing. What player is going to hear about that and not want to go to that restaurant in the city when they hear about the Fat Wizard and how that place, like the food will make you float above the ground 3 inches like for the next hour. Like it's got like all these different weird dishes. I don't know. I'm thinking of like even Harry Potter where you got like the Weasley joke shop, but in a restaurant form. I think that would be wonderful.
I mean, I'm thinking of like for the Fat Wizard.
Oh yeah, the Russian roulette of sauces. It's like you never know what you're gonna get.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, you could either know what you're gonna get here, pick it off the menu, or we have this special dish that all the food has like random like effects in it. So
it's cheaper.
Are you brave enough?
You eat the food and you roll on the wild surge or sorcerer table.
Yes.
And now you sprout a beard of feathers.
Here's the question: has anybody ever died at this restaurant?
You eat it, and a fireball is cast
form.
on your location. That sounds awful.
Oh gosh. All right, let's talk about homework. So, do we have any thing as far as like books or podcasts or movies or whatever that would be good inspiration for DMs out there wanting to dive into this whole idea of making food more than just an afterthought in their campaign worlds beyond, we'll throw it out there right up front, the fantastic book that everybody needs to check out, which is Murica Restaurants and Retail. Make sure you go and check that out. But any other sources of inspiration for homework?
Yeah, I've got 2 sources that I would recommend. The first one is WebDM on YouTube. Did a video called How to Eat Monsters. And they actually talk a bit about different magical effects and benefits to eating different kinds of monsters. A lot of the stuff we talked about here, they kind of cover that and work out some of the logistics, some of the mechanics of that. And another weird one, I didn't find out about this until after we were done writing all of this. I just started reading it this week. There's a manga called Delicious in Dungeon. And it's just this party of adventurers who are flat broke that can't afford to go and buy food. So instead, they're trekking through the dungeon and they find this old dwarf who is teaching them how to kill and cook monsters from the dungeon to be the most delicious possible meal they could imagine.
And let's be honest, that sounds like one of the coolest NPCs your players are ever going to come across.
Oh, yeah.
This random chef that's just stuck in a dungeon somewhere, just waiting for adventurers to come by so he can show them how to cook.
Yes. We didn't talk about like what these eccentric chefs would be like, but I think they'd be awesome NPCs.
Well, this one in particular agrees to join the party because he finds out that they're trying to track down this dragon deep in the dungeon. So he decides he wants to go with them, not because he wants to particularly help them or cares, but because he's never tried.
I was gonna say he wants to cook
before.
It is what he wants to do.
Yeah,
dragon steak. He is all about it.
That's awesome. I think I kind of have 3. They're more like if you want to get like techniques on like what you might be able to incorporate for flavor in the world, like based on these are all documentaries. There's one called Chef's Table, which is on Netflix, which is fascinating. It looks at like some of the top chefs in the world, how they got there, the types of food that they make, their working process, and how they come up with new foods. You can get like personalities to him, or Mitch. It might have been one of you guys said like the crazy personalities of the chefs. Like you will get crazy personalities of chefs that you might be able to work into your world through that documentary.
Yeah, just take that chef, make him into a gnome. Give him a higher pitched voice.
Yes, of course.
The other thing I would recommend is a documentary called Cooked, where it talks about how to cook with water, how to cook with fire, and how to cook with the earth. And wind as well. So just all of these different ways that people you could the things that he looks at. Michael Paul, I don't remember remember what his name is. Michael Pollan is his name. He works and cooks with.
He's gonna be so mad when he listens to the show and you get his name.
I know.
wrong.
I even looked it up before I was gonna say it, and I still butchered it. There we go. So that one is fantastic. And then there's one, if you want to look at like somebody learning how to cook foods in a completely different culture than as their own, which might like give inspiration for what your players will be like in the game. There's one called Uncharted that Gordon Ramsay is a part of, that's put on by National Geographic, that is fascinating and fantastic and gives you so many inspirations for different types of foods, even in our own world, that we wouldn't think about using, that are staples for everybody else in the world. So how to make those things normal, how to cook with them, and he just knocks it out of the park with that. So those would be my 3 to look at.
Fantastic. I love the idea of taking, like literally taking a famous chef, making them into an NPC, and like throwing out things that they have said, and seeing if any of your players pick up on that. Like, you watch that show too.
We did that. Yet another reason to grab the restaurant's retail book. The Prince of Flavor City is Guillaume Fier.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Good luck cracking that code.
I was going to say Borden Chamsey. Like, nobody's going to know who that is, you know?
So for me, obviously we talked a little bit about, especially with the foods with benefits, like how so many video games have it. And I guess my advice is not to go and play an entire video game but like if you are a video game player and you're playing these games that are like that, I can think of just even a few that I've played recently. Like Monster Hunter is absolutely, you go and you eat this food, and first of all, it's the best part of the game because these little cat creatures cook it for you. But like Final Fantasy 15, the party literally sits around a fire and you choose the dishes, and the dishes give you different types of benefits. I'm playing Dragon Ball Z Kakarot right now. Food gives you different sorts of benefits. Just kind of like be aware of that if you are a video game player, and just look at that as inspiration as you're playing. Also, if you head over to YouTube, there is this series that's called Dwarven Kitchen that is all about fancy food making. It's something you can look at as inspiration, but even more so, there's this fantastic cooking channel called Binging with Babish.
Oh,
and
I love that one.
It's fantastic, first of all, but he gets into all these different like dishes that are made from like TV shows and movies and cartoons and books, and there are a ton of videos that would be great for inspiration, including he does a whole Lord of the Rings series and a Harry Potter series. And like if you want inspiration for bringing food to the table, as it were, man, we should have done more food puns this whole entire episode. Let's be honest. It should have just been chock full of.
We should have cooked some up before we came, so we knew what we were gonna do.
Yes,
then everybody
indeed.
could just relish how many food puns we had.
Yep.
But like, check out Binging with Babish, and honestly, if you really want to go above and beyond, like, you hand out those menus, but you also cook a dish to like eat together as like your D&D group that is like fantasy foods, or you have like a whole feast where you have every single player cook some sort of dish to bring to the table that is all about like, oh, this is all food from the Fat Dragon, we're all gonna eat it, or the Fat Wizard, it's gonna be great. Like, that would be a great memory for you and your players.
Oh, yeah. Well, at the end of the day, dice rolls come and go. People don't remember the stories of the dice rolls. They remember the experiences.
Exactly.
That's the best way to go about it right there.
Yeah.
So speaking of experiences to remember, Tim, thank you for joining us on this episode. Where, if any of our listeners would like to either keep up with your work or get in touch with you, is there somewhere they can go to do that?
Yep. So anyone wanting to keep up with the Monsters of Merca setting and all the other stuff that we're going to be doing with that, as well as other products that are coming out of the company, can go over to actionfiction.com. Anyone wanting to see my somewhat dark sense of humor at times, but just keep up with my work, I'm on Twitter as Strato_Magus, STRATO_MAGUS. And so yeah, I do post updates of the works that we're doing. I occasionally post little snippets of things that I've created for this. The Oath of Flavor was one of the first things I teased, and the ice cream monks that we created went a little weird.
So fantastic. Make sure to check out Monsters of Merca restaurants and retail. Make sure to go and follow Tim and just tweet at him every single awesome fantasy food that you can think of. I'm sure
100%. I will absolutely appreciate that, especially since I'm already I did mention I'm working on the Adventure Path book for restaurants and retail, so by all means throw your food at
me do your job, Tim.
help enable me to focus more on the story than the mechanics.
Help me in my creative block. There we go.
There we go.
Awesome, Tim. It's been great having you.
Thanks again, Tim.
It's been great being here. Thanks. No problem.
Well, we want to thank Tim once again for joining us on this episode of the Dungeon Masters Block. We hope that you, as the listener, have really enjoyed this past discussion. I know I have, and I know I am just teeming with ideas of different kinds of foods to put into my fantasy homebrew world. If you are also just getting all this inspiration about different kinds of fantasy foods, we'd love to hear about them. You can send us an email at dungeonmasterblock@gmail.com. If you liked this episode or previous episodes or future episodes of our show, please help us out. Help us to reach more DMs and future DMs out there by giving us a review on whatever podcast app you use. It is super appreciated. We have a Patreon member shout out of the week, and this week's Patreon member shout out goes to Alex. Alex is one of the powerful cosmic dragons. So thankful for your level of support, Alex, of the show and other Block Party Podcast Network shows. It's so appreciated. We all tremble at the might of the Cosmic Dragon. Thank you so much for your support. The Dungeon Masters Block is a proud member of the Block Party Podcast Network. Check out other shows like Geek Wars, Dungeons and Dragons and Daughters, Detentions and Dragons, and more. Well, that's all that we have for you on this episode of the Dungeon Masters Block, the place where we come to talk about the Dungeon Master, the most important person in the game, the only person capable of playing God, killing characters, and lowering the egos of all other people at the table. I'm your host, DM Mitch, reminding you to always keep on dungeon mastering.